The shout sliced through the banking hall like a cold blade. "Get your filthy hands off my desk right now!" Branch Director Eric Nolan roared, sending a shockwave that froze the entire Langford and Miles Bank on LaSalle Avenue in a single breath. Every eye snapped toward the black woman seated in front of him, Dana Carter, 35 years old, her face as still as glass, her deep eyes unblinking even after absorbing his unjust fury. Eric snatched her loan file, a spotless stack of papers with near-perfect credit-stable income and a request for $385,000, then flung it upward as if the documents themselves were a personal insult. A mug of hot coffee toppled and splattered across the marble floor, staining it with jagged brown streaks. Dana didn't move, didn't speak. She sat there with her spine straight as a steel line, her hands resting lightly on her knees, silent like the eye of a storm. And inside her gaze, a single thought spiraled through 10 years. It's time. Eric, meanwhile, was trembling. He tried to hide it, but the hand gripping the file twitched as soon as he saw the name Carter printed in, bold at the top of the form. Carter. That name tightened his throat with a flash of terror, as if a ghost from the past had suddenly taken the seat across from him. Panic spiked, and he hurled the entire stack into Dana's face. Papers scattered like startled birds. 2 sheets drifted toward the transaction counter, where Linda Cooper, a teller with more than 20 years of experience, reached down to pick them up without thinking, then froze. Carter. Linda's heart skipped. Her breath became thin. She gripped the counter until her fingers turned white. A memory she had spent a decade burying burst open raw and merciless, like someone forcing her to watch a locked film reel she never wanted to see again. 10 years earlier. A cold morning. In the exact same chair where Dana now sat, a man had walked in. Black, polite, eyes sharp like a seasoned federal agent. On the desk, an FBI badge. His name was Robert Carter, Dana's father. His loan application had been flawless, impossible to reject. But he was rejected anyway. No explanation. No reason. Linda remembered the moment security dragged Robert out of the bank, while the branch director at the time simply folded his arms and watched through the glass as if he were observing a nuisance being removed. 2 weeks later, Robert Carter was dead. The file said suicide, but Linda knew something was wrong. The next morning, she heard CEO Charles Langford's voice on the phone. Right here in this very lobby saying, "The problem is handled. He will not be investigating us anymore." Linda had stayed silent for 10 full years, but the moment she saw the name, Carter on Dana's form, that decade of silence slammed back into her chest like a wrecking hammer. And at the front, the performance continued. Eric, hands shaking phone in one fist, barked into the receiver, "FBI, get here. Now someone from the Carter family is in the building." Some customers sidestepped in alarm. A man sighed, annoyed. A woman whispered, "Here we go again." But Dana checked her watch, 2 hours, 53 minutes. The seconds ticked in total silence like a countdown. She lifted her eyes and looked directly at Eric, not angry, not afraid, just a calmness so unnerving that it made him step back half a pace. Her gaze looked like it was staring straight through the present, locked on a single purpose, finishing what her father started. That calmness alone made Eric stumble backward. He grabbed the landline and shouted for security. "Marcus, take her to the back room now." 10 seconds later, the heavy thud of boots echoed down the hall. Marcus Hale appeared. His face set his posture unmistakably military. His eyes swept the scene, spilled coffee-shredded papers, Eric's ragged breathing, and Dana sitting like carved stone. Marcus sensed danger sharply and immediately, but orders were orders. "Mom, come with me." Dana rose without protest. No argument. No fear. As she walked, the black leather briefcase she had left on the chair remained slightly open, revealing just enough of the inside to feel intentional, like a secret waiting for the right set of eyes. Linda stared at it, her throat tight. Another Carter being taken into that room, Dana's heels clicked against the stone floor, steady and rhythmic, tap, 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 like time itself counting down toward something inevitable. Each step carried the cold smell of marble, the bitterness of spilled coffee, the rising scent of fear leaking from Eric's skin. Marcus followed a few steps behind, eyes narrowed with instinct. Something was very wrong here. Dana felt it. Linda felt it. Marcus felt it. Only two people didn't or refused to, Eric and the person waiting behind that back room door. When Dana vanished down the hallway, Eric spun around, wiping sweat from his forehead, panting like he had just escaped something far bigger than himself. He had no idea. Today wasn't the day he escaped. Today was the day justice came to collect, and the briefcase Dana left behind with that purposeful opening waited for the exact person who needed to see inside. Linda swallowed hard. Her legs trembled, but her eyes couldn't pull away from the case. She knew what it held, or at least she knew it held the truth she had feared for 10 years, and today that truth refused to stay buried. Today it had grown claws and turned back. No one in the bank lobby realized they had just stepped into a moment that would be retold for years. No one understood that the calm black woman with the unshaken eyes was about to shake an empire. But time understood, and the seconds were still counting. Dana Carter had not returned to ask for a loan. She had returned to finish a war that had been abandoned, a war named Carter versus Langford and Miles. And this was only the beginning. The interrogation room door closed behind Dana Carter with a crisp, cold click, an opening punctuation mark to a new chapter. No one in the bank understood. The dim fluorescent light cast pale stripes across the worn metal table and the shaky metal chair. No windows, no ventilation, only a ceiling camera everyone believed had been dead for weeks. Dana sat down, her posture straight, her breathing steady, as if she had rehearsed the art of staying calm under pressure more times than anyone could imagine. Across from her, Eric Nolan panted from running and from fear while Marcus Hale leaned lightly against the door. Muscles tightened, ready to intervene the moment anyone crossed a line. Eric dropped the torn pile of papers on the table, like evidence of a crime he didn't yet understand belonged to him. "Your real name," he demanded, trying to force himself into the role of the one in control. Dana's voice was soft. "The name on my application. Do not play games with me." Eric slammed his palm down, the papers scattered fluttering in the stale air. Marcus shot him a quick look, irritation flickering across his eyes at behavior far below the professionalism he had been trained for. Dana didn't move, her gaze locked on Eric, her tone calm, yet sharp. "What are you looking for? Or what are you running from?" For a second, Eric recoiled as if she had struck him. She hadn't raised her voice, but her words hit the most fragile spot in his guilty heart. He tried to rebuild his aggression, snatching up the papers one by one. "Your income, your address, your job. None of it matches the profile of a standard client." Standard according to what Dana asked, slowly, clearly, without the slightest sign of impatience. That question, not loud, not threatening, made Eric's lip tremble. He glanced at Marcus for support, but Marcus stood still, expression unreadable, hand resting lightly on his belt. "Our standard is what Dana tilted her head, her eyes sliding like a silent blade through the layers of Eric's defenses. "The same standard you have used to deny people for 10 years, a direct strike to memory." A tick pulsed in Eric's cheek as the mourning Robert Carter had been dragged out of the branch, rushed back into his mind like a shadow tearing across the room. Eric jumped up, suddenly ran into the hallway and dialed frantically. "I need you here now. There is a Carter. She is asking questions like she knows everything. Hurry!" His voice cracked like breaking glass. Dana heard every word echo through the thin wall. The corner of her mouth lifted. She had been right. Fear still lived quietly inside the men who had destroyed her father. When Eric returned, sweat soaked his back. Dana asked, "Who is coming?" He exhaled hard. "None of your concern. It concerns you more than you think." Her voice was low but heavy, like a stone dropping into still water. Marcus observed everything from the door, and when Dana's eyes briefly met his, there was no plea for help, only a silent acknowledgement that he would matter in the next few minutes. The realization unsettled Marcus in a way he couldn't explain. Out in the lobby, Linda Cooper stared at the dark hallway, her heart hammering, as if an invisible hand were squeezing it tight. The image of Robert Carter being escorted out, replayed so vividly she could hear his shoes on the stone floor, hear the soft and polite "thank you" he had whispered to her, even as he was mistreated. Linda pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her eyes burned. She glanced at Dana's briefcase, the tiny gap in its lid like a door cracked open for the truth to slip out. The 3 steps that separated her from it felt like a year. "No, not again," she whispered. But guilt, a serpent that had slept 10 years, uncoiled and pushed her forward. Back in the interrogation room, Eric dug through the papers clinging to a collapsing story. "Your credit score is 815. Your income is 140,000. No debt, no late payments. You expect anyone to believe this?" "The Federal Bureau of Investigation," Dana replied softly. Eric froze. Marcus frowned. Dana placed both hands on the table. "You are reenacting an old script, one my father faced. And you know what happened after that?" Eric flushed. Your father took his own. Finish the sentence." Dana said, her eyes cold as ice. Eric choked on his words. He knew something terrible had happened to Robert Carter. Everyone inside this bank knew they simply never dared speak it. Marcus, though unrelated to the past, felt the chill in the air like a rising tide of needles. He spoke for the first time. "Enough." His voice was steady, low, authoritative. Eric snapped toward him. "Whose side are you on?" Marcus answered. "The side of the truth." For the first time that afternoon, Dana looked at Marcus fully. In her gaze flickered something rare hope. But the confrontation was only beginning. Footsteps approached at the end of the hallway. Not fast, not frantic. Slow, controlled, powerful. The door swung open. Charles Langford, Chief Executive Officer of Langford and Miles, entered as if carrying judgment itself on his shoulders. Silver hair slicked back, $10,000 suit eyes, sharp and cold as twin needles. He saw Dana and stopped. His eyes widened for 3 long seconds, as if he were staring at the ghost of Robert Carter come back to life. Then his face sealed shut, hard and venomous. "Your father's name?" he asked, his voice scraping like metal. Dana answered without hesitation. "Special Agent Robert Carter, of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Deceased. The air thickened. Charles narrowed his eyes, speaking through clenched teeth. Throw her out. Call the Bureau. Report an impersonator. Dana lifted her chin. I have not impersonated anything. I filed a loan application. The same thing my father did 10 years ago. The words 10 years crashed into Charles like a hammer against a cracked wall. Linda in the lobby heard it and covered her mouth with both hands. Marcus looked at Charles and for the first time saw something beyond power, a deep-buried terror of the truth resurfacing. Dana lowered her eyes to her watch. The second hand slid forward. My father was never given a chance to speak. Today I speak for him. And in that moment, though no one fully understood it yet, history turned its hinge. The battle of a man buried long ago had come alive through the unwavering gaze of his daughter. And the interrogation room, instead of trapping her, was quietly becoming the doorway to the collapse of an empire named Langford and Miles. Charles Langford's footsteps were still echoing across the stone floor when Dana Carter glanced at the watch on her wrist. 3 hours, 7 minutes. The second hand moved one tick at a time, like a quiet reminder that the truth was nearing its breaking point. Charles took another step, his shadow falling over Dana like an old wall that had shielded a decade of buried wrongdoing. You do not belong here, he said, with a curled lip, his voice low and laced with venom. Financial institutions like this are not for. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late that he was about to say something capable of destroying his entire career. But it was already too late. Dana lifted her eyes, cold and precise. Say it slowly. Let the camera record it. The sentence dropped into the room, like the second snip of a wire on a bomb that was ready to explode. Charles followed her gaze. Up in the corner of the room, a small camera the size of a clenched fist blinked with a slow red light. 1 blink. 2. 3. And with each blink, the color drained further from Charles's face. That camera is off, he growled, mouth suddenly dry. Maintenance for 3 weeks. Dana tilted her head, her voice gentle like a breeze, slipping under a door. It was reactivated. Through administrative override. Or she paused just long enough to watch Charles swallow hard. The Bureau. Remotely. Silence fell over the room like a slab of stone. Eric Nolan blinked rapidly, sweat glistening on his forehead. Marcus Hale looked at the camera, then at Charles, then at Dana, and he understood no one in this room could hide anything anymore. Charles fought to steady his breath. Are you threatening me? Dana replied. I don't need to threaten anyone. The truth does that on its own. Eric snatched his phone and shouted into it. Federal agents, hurry, we have an impersonator. Dangerous behavior, possible sabotage. His voice echoed down the hallway and reached Linda Cooper, who was trembling in front of Dana's briefcase. But the voice that answered the call was what sent the entire bank floor into shock. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chicago Field Office. Our units have already been deployed to your location. Estimated arrival in 14 minutes. Do you have any additional information to report? Eric froze. He looked at Charles. Charles looked at Dana. Dana smiled a small smile carrying the weight of 10 years of waiting. You see, she said softly, they're already coming. And not because you called. The air felt sucked out of the room. Charles clenched his fists until the veins rose like ropes under his skin. Marcus saw something he had never seen on Charles's face, a total loss of control. Eric whispered, as if in a trance. No, this cannot be. But it was happening. And the red camera light kept blinking, each pulse marking another crime being documented. Charles lunged toward the table, leaning in close, trying to crush Dana beneath his anger. "You think you know everything? You think you can walk in here and accuse me?" Dana didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Her answer dropped the room into an even deeper level of collapse. "I am not accusing you. You are accusing yourself. With your own words. And with the camera." The corner of Charles's mouth twitched uncontrollably. He turned to Eric. "Call again. Order them to come inside immediately. Tell them we are detaining an imposter." Eric redialed. But no rescue came. "Units are already deployed." The operator repeated her tone, colder and more official this time. "Do not move the subject. Federal jurisdiction will apply upon arrival." The final sentence wrapped around Charles and Eric like a tightening metal collar. Marcus stood at the door, eyes wide. He had never heard that tone used by the Bureau, the tone reserved for serious federal cases, certainly not for routine impersonation reports. Dana spoke slowly. 13 minutes. Eric stared at her. 13 minutes until they enter. 13 minutes for you and Charles to decide whether to continue saying what you just said or remain silent and wait for the handcuffs. Charles slammed the table. "You do not understand any of this. Who sent you? Who gave you the right, my father?" One sentence, one beat, one blade sliding straight into the deepest wound of the last decade. "He brought me here. The evidence he left brought me here. And the 10 years you spent hiding the truth brought me here." Charles staggered backward. Eric looked at him, waiting for him to deny it, but Charles couldn't. The name Robert Carter was not a name they wanted to say aloud. It was a curse, a shadow, a locked door they never expected would burst open today. Out in the lobby, Linda braced herself against the counter, her hands shaking violently as she stared at the briefcase. She remembered Charles's voice 10 years ago, saying the problem has been handled, and now, with the red camera light flashing inside the interrogation room, she understood that everything was returning, and this time, the truth wasn't leaving. She swallowed hard, then took one step, then another, toward the briefcase. Her arms shook so much they barely felt like part of her own body. In the interrogation room, Marcus swallowed hard as he watched Charles wipe his face, trying to regain composure while his hand trembled uncontrollably. Dana closed her eyes briefly and drew a deep breath as though pulling strength from the memory of the father who died in this very battle. 10 years. 10 years no one dared speak. 10 years no one dared look at the truth. But today the truth no longer asked for permission. It was coming second by second in the rhythm of that blinking red light. Charles stepped back from the table, his voice rough. "You will regret today." Dana opened her eyes, looking straight into him, as if seeing through the expensive suit and into the decayed core beneath. "No, today is the day you regret." Eric swallowed hard. Marcus straightened, preparing himself for the moment he knew would change the entire course of his life, and the watch on Dana's wrist clicked to 3 hours, 8 minutes, 13 minutes left. The moment Charles Langford feared most, the moment truth came to collect its debt, was approaching like the footsteps of fate. Each red blink of the camera delivered a warning, a count, a sentence, and the countdown of 10 years of buried sins had officially begun. The air inside the interrogation room grew so thick that Marcus Hale felt as if every breath was being stretched tight by an invisible fear clinging to the very men who had created it. Eric Nolan, his face flushed with panic, lunged toward the table and grabbed his notebook, his hand shaking wildly, like someone no longer in control of his own muscles. We have to document everything," he stammered, clinging to the illusion of authority. By fabricating a report he believed might save him from the Bureau's blade, drawing closer by the minute. Write what Charles barked, though his own voice trembled in a way Marcus had never heard from the so-called powerful man. Write she was aggressive. Write she threatened us. Write she lost control. Write anything that forces the Bureau to handle her the moment they arrive. Eric bent over the notebook, scribbling frantic, ugly lines that looked as dirty as the lies behind them. 3 hours, 6 minutes. He muttered aloud. Between ragged breaths, the subject displayed aggressive behavior, raised her voice, threatened staff. Marcus's eyes narrowed, lifting his head like a wolf sensing the scent of deception. He looked at Dana. She remained still, her fingers interlaced her back straight, a posture so calm it was unnerving. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved from her chair. She had not shown the slightest hint of anything that could be called threatening. Yet in that notebook, an entirely different person was being constructed. A fiction, a trap. And Marcus began to understand he had been standing on the wrong side for nearly 3 years in this branch. Charles leaned close to Eric, his tone low but venomous. Add this, the subject showed signs of intoxication. Breath smelled of alcohol, eyes red, behavior unstable. Eric wrote his lines, jagged, frantic, splattered like strokes of desperation. Marcus felt his face heat. "She is not intoxicated," he said, his voice deep and steady. Charles snapped toward him, eyes narrowed. "You are a security guard, not a doctor." "I am a human being," Marcus replied without blinking. "I know what alcohol smells like. She doesn't have any on her." That single sentence cracked the room. A small fracture, but the first one in the wall of power Charles had built for years. Eric jumped back in, desperate to regain control. Add this, the subject attempted to intimidate staff by mentioning the Bureau attempted manipulation, showed threatening behavior Marcus could not hold back anymore. "She has only sat here and answered questions. The one doing the threatening is you." Eric spun around red with humiliation and rage, but before he could fire back, the Bureau's dispatcher spoke again from the still open phone line, her voice carrying through the speaker like a blade. "Units are in transit. Do not engage with the subject. Any interference will be evaluated as obstruction of federal justice." The sentence sliced the room in half. Charles froze. Eric looked struck, and Marcus looked at Dana with a completely different expression. It was no longer the look of a guard toward someone detained. It was the look of a man who had finally seen the truth he could no longer look away from. In the lobby, Linda Cooper trembled before Dana's briefcase, like someone standing at the gate of an underworld crowded with the souls of the past. Light reflected off the metal zipper. The small gap revealed the edge of a document inside, and Linda understood that pulling just a few centimeters would change the fate of the entire bank. She drew a deep breath, but her body still shook, as if the memory of 10 years ago were gripping her by the spine, dragging her back to the same spot where Robert Carter had been destroyed. She remembered his eyes as he was escorted out, not angry, but sorrowful, the eyes of a man who knew the truth he carried would be buried under the boots of power. Now, staring at Dana's briefcase, Linda knew this was the same war, the same blood, the same Carter name. In the interrogation room, Charles snatched the phone from Eric and dialed a private number. "Listen, it's me. There is a Carter here, just like last time. She is asking questions no one is supposed to know. He paused, his face turning pale. I know the protocol. I know what needs to be done. Just get here. Quickly. Marcus heard every word. The phrase last time made him tighten his belt and inhale slowly, deeply. Last time, what happened last time, Dana had heard every word as well, her face unchanged. But in her eyes, Marcus saw fire, a quiet fire fueled by a decade of loss. Eric dropped back into his chair, continuing to write his lies, but now his hand trembled so violently, the words twisted into barely readable marks. Dana spoke softly. Are you sure you want the Bureau reading those lines when they review the camera footage? Eric froze. For one moment, he looked directly at Dana and saw himself reflected in her eyes. Small, cowardly, guilty. Charles slammed his hand on the table. Be quiet. Marcus straightened immediately, shoulders squared. To him, Dana was no threat. The most dangerous person in the room was the old man unraveling before them. Charles was so focused on Dana, he didn't notice Marcus had fully shifted to her side. And then the inevitable happened. Marcus's radio crackled, then delivered a sharp, clean announcement. All units. Estimated Bureau arrival, 12 minutes. Federal jurisdiction begins on contact. Charles's face drained of all color. Eric collapsed into his chair, whispering, They're really coming. Dana calmly adjusted her sleeve and touched her father's watch, just as the second hand slid to 3 hours, 10 minutes. Yes, she said gently, as if announcing a snowfall long predicted. And when they arrive, they will not arrest me. Charles roared. Do not think, for Dana cut him off, her voice, slow and deliberate. They will arrest the men who are writing false reports in this room. Marcus looked at the two men digging their own graves with every stroke of their pens, and inside him, a quiet decision fell into place, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. He would not stand on the wrong side anymore. Today he stood with the truth, a truth that was coming, second by second, with every red blink of the camera, with every breath of the woman carrying the name this entire bank believed it had buried. But they had forgotten one thing: the truth does not die. It only waits to be called awake. And today, it was waking up. A faint crackle from Marcus's radio faded out, and the room dropped into a silence so heavy it felt as if everyone inside had been pushed to the edge of a cliff whose bottom no one could see. Charles Langford turned his head, his eyes clouded with panic, while Eric Nolan stared at the falsified report as if the crooked lines he had written were wrapping around his throat. For a moment, no one dared speak. Only the ticking of Dana Carter's watch filled the room steady cold, as if time itself had stepped inside to pass judgment. 3 hours, 11 minutes, 12 minutes until the Bureau arrived. Marcus swallowed his back straight, feeling as though he stood at a crossroads between the man he used to be and something larger pulling him forward. He had been a soldier. He had seen lies, cruelty, injustice. But he had never stood inside a room where the person he was assigned to guard was the one being hunted by men in suits and titles. And for the first time in 3 years at this bank, he realized he wasn't guarding Dana. He was guarding them from the truth they had created. Eric bent over his notebook again, writing while muttering like someone slipping out of reality. The subject threatened, the subject was aggressive, abnormal behavior. But the more he wrote, the more his hand trembled, each stroke looking like fear strangled under the weight of truth, approaching step by step. Dana tilted her head, watching him without spite or mockery, simply as someone witnessing a man bury himself. "Do you think the Bureau will believe those words?" she asked quietly, and the question froze Eric in place. Charles roared, "Be quiet!" But his voice had lost its authority. Now it was only the desperate cry of a man watching the game slip out of his hands. Marcus turned toward him, his eyes darkening like a warning. "That's enough." Charles stiffened. He stared at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, as though the man standing at the door wasn't a bank employee anymore, but a witness standing on a side Charles never imagined. Meanwhile, the bank lobby continued moving like a stage full of actors, unaware they were extras in a tragedy unfolding behind a closed door. Linda Cooper stood 3 steps from Dana's briefcase, cold sweat sliding down her back. The black case sat on the chair, its zipper slightly open a corner of white paper, peeking out like a hand reaching for her. No one was watching. No sound called her except the whisper inside her mind. This time, do not turn away. 10 years earlier, she had watched Robert Carter be rejected, humiliated, escorted out with hopeless eyes, and she had stayed silent. That memory now gripped her throat like an icy hand. Linda knew that if she opened this case, her life would change. And if she didn't, the ghost of Robert Carter would follow her forever. 10 years of guilt was too heavy to carry another day. She took a shaking breath, reached forward, and touched the handle of the case. Back in the interrogation room, Charles leaned close to Eric, speaking in a hiss so low only someone right beside him could hear. "Listen to me," he whispered like a snake sliding across stone. "We just need to keep her inside the room. When the Bureau arrives, they will believe us first. We are the bank. We have reports. We have witnesses. She has nothing. Nothing." Dana laughed softly, and the sound silenced all 3 men. "I have everything. You just don't realize how much evidence you have handed me yourself." Charles spun around. "What are you talking about, Dana?" Tilted her head, her eyes sharp like shards of glass. "Who did you call the moment you heard the name Carter? Who informed you? Why did you panic? Why do you think the Bureau is coming to help you when you are committing a crime at this very moment?" Charles tried to control his voice, but his hand trembled. "You do not know what happened 10 years ago. You do not understand the context." "I understand more than you think," Dana replied. "I know my father came here to expose your discriminatory loan scheme. I know you orchestrated the seizure of properties from black families to resell them to Heritage Equity Group at triple the price. And I know you feared my father because he had already gathered enough evidence." Charles staggered back. You cannot know that wrong." Dana placed 2 fingers gently on the metal table. "I know everything." Eric nearly collapsed. Marcus stared at Charles the way someone looks at an animal backed into a corner, not dangerous, just terrified. Charles's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his face draining of color, then turned it off slowly. No one asked who it was. No one needed to. Everyone understood it was a call he did not want to answer, so close to the Bureau's arrival. Out in the lobby, Linda unzipped the briefcase. She looked at the first document, Robert Carter's photo, his badge from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, his warm smile, his arm around a young girl, Dana. A tear slid down Linda's cheek. She opened the second page. Robert's handwriting. File 6821. Pattern confirmed. If I cannot finish, someone will. Linda's throat closed. She began to cry openly. And then, as if pulled by a force stronger than fear, Linda rose, clutched the briefcase to her chest, and walked straight toward the printer. A storm was breaking from within the very people who once stayed silent. Back in the interrogation room, a loud slam of the table detonated the tension. Charles struck it with his palm. "I am not afraid of you. You are just Dana Stood." Slowly, steadily, her eyes locked onto him, not challenging, not threatening, declaring, "No, I am not just anything. I am the person you tried to kill twice, once 10 years ago, and today, when I walked into this room. And there are 11 minutes left before the Bureau arrives to hear you confirm it yourself." Marcus inhaled sharply. Eric dropped his pen to the floor. Charles stumbled back 3 steps, his hands shaking uncontrollably, and the red camera light on the wall continued to blink, like a heartbeat, like a warning, like the sound of truth approaching. The time for lies was running out, and the truth was closing in. Only 11 minutes left. The second hand on Dana Carter's watch slid to 3 hours, 13 minutes, and in that instant, the atmosphere inside the interrogation room cracked open in a way no one could have predicted. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with a suffocating silence, a silence that warned of the earthquake about to sweep away every lie the 2 men in this room had spent a decade trying to bury. Charles Langford leaned against the wall, clutching the edge of his suit jacket, his complexion pale as a man watching the ghost of the past walk in, wearing the face of his victim's daughter. Eric Nolan shrank beside the chair, his hand frozen over the falsified report, no longer able to write a single line. The pen had slipped out of his awareness, now nothing more than proof of the cowardice he had just signed his name to. Only Marcus Hale, the security guard who had lived in the shadow of orders for years, was changing with every breath. The air was chaotic, but his eyes grew clearer, sharper. He looked at Dana as if she were a doorway opening toward the path he had forgotten he once wanted to walk when he left the military. "Do you think the Bureau will believe that report?" Dana asked again, her voice, steady each word, falling like a stone into still water. Eric trembled. You don't think Dana cut him off. You wrote that I lost control, that I was aggressive, threatening." She tilted her head, her gaze sharp as a blade, "while the camera records every breath you take." Charles shot upright as if stung. "That camera is off." It was reactivated 23 minutes ago by remote command. The moment the words reached him, Charles froze. A shiver ran down his spine. Marcus saw it, and he knew that was not the reaction of an innocent man. Suddenly footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate. Linda Cooper was approaching. The door opened silently, because she pushed it gently, but her trembling breath was enough to make everyone turn. Linda held Dana's black briefcase against her chest like something sacred. Her eyes were red and shining with tears. Charles jerked forward. "What is that?" Linda said nothing. She placed the briefcase on the metal table. Slowly, firmly. "You opened it." Charles hissed his voice, scraping like metal dragged across the floor. "I opened it," Linda said, her voice low, shaking but steady, like someone rising from 10 years of self-inflicted ashes. "I saw what was inside. All of it." "You," Charles lunged. Marcus stepped in front of Linda instantly, a reflex born from instinct, not thought. "Step back," he said, his voice lowered, but so forceful it split the air. Charles stopped cold. He didn't dare push past. Linda turned to Dana and burst into tears, but not tears of fear, tears of release. "I saw your father's photo," she whispered, her voice cracked but sincere. He smiled at me, even when I stood there and did nothing to help him. Dana met her eyes, seeing the scars of a decade etched into every wrinkle. "I saw his notebook," Linda continued, her hands clenched. "Case 6, 8, 21, families denied, my signature on the forms. Her voice broke. I stayed silent too long. Charles roared, "Be quiet! You have no idea what you're doing." But Linda was beyond his reach now. "I will testify," she said. "I owe that to Agent Robert Carter. And to you." Dana's face softened for the first time, a flicker of humanity glowing through the storm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Just one word, but Linda heard it like daylight breaking through a 10-year night. Charles, drowning, turned to Eric. "Say something. Do something. Save me." Eric stared at him like he was looking at a stranger. This was the man he had followed, defended, obeyed only to be discarded the moment danger arrived. And now those two words, "save me," sounded like a confession that everything was already over. Amid the chaos, Marcus raised his radio, his hand steady. "Internal situation unstable," he reported. "Recommend approaching units proceed with caution." A voice replied instantly. "Copy. 8 minutes out." Everyone looked at Marcus. Charles's eyes bulged. "What are you doing? You work for this bank. I order you." Marcus turned his stare sharp as steel. "I work for the law, and for what is right." The words hit the room like lightning. Charles fell silent, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Dana rose, not quickly, not defiantly, but with the gravity of judgment itself guiding her movements. "You asked what I know about 10 years ago," she said, her gaze fixed on Charles. "I know my father uncovered your discriminatory lending model. I know you built Heritage Equity Group to acquire the properties of 29 black families denied loans they fully qualified for. I know you paid off a former agent to write a report claiming my father took his own life." Charles staggered back, as if struck in the chest. "You have no proof," he rasped. "You're wrong," Dana replied. "You forgot that my father was the most meticulous man I ever knew." She placed her phone on the table. The screen displayed a notification from the Bureau. "All data has been synchronized to the federal system." Terror spread across Charles's face, total and absolute. One final truth, sharp enough to end 10 years of running. Her father uploaded everything to the Bureau's server before he died. Charles hit the wall behind him. Eric dropped his pen and covered his face with both hands. Linda stood crying. Marcus stood like a shield. 3 hours, 14 minutes. 6 minutes left. Marcus looked at Dana. "Whatever you need, I will do it." It was not a promise. It was an oath. Dana looked across the room at the people forced into choosing between the light and the shadows they had built their lives in. Then she spoke, her voice low, but ringing with the weight of a verdict. "Get ready. When the Bureau arrives, I am not the one who should be afraid." And outside the Bureau's black vehicles were closing in, silent as ghosts, precise as blades, unstoppable as truth. Time no longer belonged to Langford and Miles. Time had returned to its rightful owner, the truth. The second hand slid to 3 hours, 15 minutes, and with it, the entire interrogation room felt like a heart caught between two beats, one half trembling with the fear of men who had abused power, the other half awakening in those who had been forced into silence. Charles Langford was still pressed against the wall, his lips twitching as if he were trying to swallow the fragments of memories he thought he had buried a decade ago. Eric Nolan sat collapsed beside the table, both hands gripping his head, the falsified report lying open before him like a living monument to his own cowardice. And in the center of the room stood Marcus Hale, no longer just a guard, but a pillar rising from chaos, his eyes shifting between Dana and Charles, between Linda and Eric, the only one who seemed truly steady in a room spiraling downward. No one spoke. No one dared break the moment. Only the breathing of time continued slow and heavy, and none of them knew that outside the engines of 3 black Bureau SUVs had already begun rumbling at the end of LaSalle Street. Dana Carter was the first to break the silence. Her voice was not loud, but each word struck with the clarity of forged steel. 10 years ago, she said, her eyes locked on Charles. My father walked into this place, and you saw him as a threat, a black man who understood the law too well, understood the system too well, understood exactly how you profited from discrimination. Eric let out a small moan, burying his face deeper in his hands. Charles reacted like a trapped animal. He took his own life. You cannot just— Are you going to finish that sentence again? Dana asked, looking straight through him, as if looking through the decade of lies behind him. Charles choked, then turned to Marcus, desperate for support. Look at her. She's trying to manipulate you. Your duty, my duty, is to protect the innocent, to Marcus, said his voice, low and measured, but every syllable landed with absolute certainty. Charles's eyes dimmed. He understood. Marcus no longer stood with him, and that single moment when a gatekeeper like Marcus woke up was the first fracture that Langford and Miles Bank would never recover from. Linda Cooper stepped into the room, her hands still trembling from having opened Dana's briefcase and resurrecting everything she had tried to bury. She looked at Dana, her eyes wet, then turned to Charles as if looking at a man who had turned this entire bank into a factory of suffering. I will tell the Bureau everything, Linda said, her voice shaking but her spine straightening with each word. Charles exploded. You have lost your mind. You think the Bureau will spare you. You signed every rejection. You caused damage to 29 families. Linda lifted her chin, her eyes glowing with courage she had not felt in 10 years. I know, and I will take responsibility. But you will not use fear to silence me anymore. Not again. A new silence fell over the room. No longer the silence of fear, but the silence of choice. Linda had chosen justice over guilt. Marcus had chosen truth over paycheck. Only Charles and Eric remained, clinging to a chair. The truth was ripping from their hands. You do not understand, Charles said, his voice slipping into desperation. The Bureau will believe me. I am the chief executive. I have reports. I have witnesses. Dana tilted her head slightly, the cold curl of her smile lowering the temperature in the room. You have witnesses? She looked at Linda. Or were you counting on her staying silent? Linda shook her head. No. Charles spun toward Eric, eyes wild. And you will talk, right? We need a unified statement. For the first time, Eric lifted his head. His eyes held the look of a man who had finally hit the bottom. I cannot, he whispered. Not after knowing the Bureau recorded everything. Not after knowing the camera was running. Charles froze as though carved from stone. Eric looked at the report. He had written the lines accusing Dana, but condemning him. Each word was a blade cutting his own throat. He tore the paper, but it was too late. Marcus said quietly, the Bureau will see the footage. Eric stared at him, desperate. You do not understand. We were following orders. Orders don't save you from the law, Marcus replied. The room fell silent again. Then a soft chime from Dana's phone. A message, one line. Units have reached LaSalle Street. Hold position. We enter in 7 minutes. Dana locked the screen and looked at Charles. Do you know what the most frightening thing is? Charles did not answer. He no longer had the breath. My father believed people could change, Dana said. Even people with power. He believed everyone has a moment of awakening. Marcus lowered his head. Linda bit her lip to hold back tears. But you, Dana, continued. You chose to kill him with a pen. And today, you tried to kill me the same way, by repeating the exact same model. Charles gasped, eyes bloodshot. What do you want? I want the truth to rise, Dana said. One sentence, one meaning, one verdict. Marcus stepped fully to her side, like a soldier choosing his ground. What else do you need? Dana looked at him. Secure the door. Don't let them do anything reckless in the next 7 minutes. I will, Marcus said, hand resting on his belt, ready to stop any man from diving into desperation. Outside the printer whirred. Linda had begun printing the entire loan history of 10 years, every discriminatory file, every signature she had penned, every family stripped of their home. She was turning her guilt into evidence against the men who had forced her silence. Eric broke down in tears, collapsing into the chair. I do not want to go to prison. You should have thought of that before writing the false report, Dana replied. Charles pressed himself to the wall, eyes wide, as he heard sirens echoing from the street through the hallway glass. But they were not sirens coming to protect him. They were sirens of the truth. Marcus looked toward the window, where blue and red lights flickered across the reflection. They are here. Dana looked at the camera, the red light still blinking, then stood tall and adjusted her jacket. Good. And in that moment, in the moment when a woman rose after 10 years of darkness, carrying her father's name like a torch, everyone in the room understood. They were no longer the ones steering this story. The story had returned to its rightful owner, Dana Carter, daughter of Robert Carter, the one finishing the unfinished war, and in 7 minutes when the door opened, justice would walk in, without asking, without hesitating, without losing a single second. The second hand jumped to 3 hours, 17 minutes, and in that moment, the entire interrogation room felt like a heart seizing between two beats, one half filled with the terror of men who had abused power, the other half awakening in the people who had been forced into silence. Dana Carter stood tall, her eyes deep and eerily calm, while out in the hallway, the low rumble of incoming bureau engines made the glass panels tremble, as if they could feel the truth closing in. Inside the room, Charles Langford curled inward, like an aging animal caught in a trap, his eyes twitching, his breaths short and sharp, his hands gripping the edge of the table, as if it were the last thing keeping him from being swept away by the flood of fear. Eric Nolan had collapsed into complete despair. His face buried in his palms, the false report he had written now burned into his mind like ink that could never be washed off. Linda Cooper moved back and forth between the printer and her desk, like someone newly freed from a decade of chains, each printed page a brick in the tower of truth that Dana's father had tried so hard to build. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale stood guard at the interrogation room door. The quiet inside him had transformed into something sharper, stronger, immovable. He would not allow anyone in this room to twist the truth ever again. They're really here, Eric muttered, like someone talking in a fever, catching the distant sound of radio chatter, the synchronized steps of federal agents closing in. Charles grabbed Eric's sleeve, pulling desperately, as if clinging to a final strand of rope. The statement. We need to match our statement. You must say she attacked us. You must say she enough, Marcus said. Not loud, but his voice cut the room like a bullet. Charles spun around, face flushing red. You're a security guard. You don't get to, I'm a witness, Marcus answered, his eyes fixed on Dana. And I know exactly who was aggressive and who lied. Charles staggered backward, as if he had been struck. Dana placed her hand lightly on the table, her voice dropping into a calm finality. You cannot control what you built through fear anymore. The people you thought would stay silent forever have chosen to stand. Linda exhaled sharply and set down the stack of freshly printed documents. The top page displayed the name of one of the 29 families denied a loan Morrison. She looked at Charles with a mixture of grief and fury. I signed those denials because of you, because you told me it was policy, but that wasn't policy. That was a crime. Charles shouted, but the sound broke apart, stripped of all authority. You think the Bureau will believe this nonsense? I am the executive here. I am the one who will answer for 10 years of discrimination, fraud, and murder. Dana replied, her tone as cold and solid as forged metal. A heavy noise echoed through the glass doors of federal vehicles slamming shut. Marcus looked toward the hallway and saw the silhouettes of agents forming up. 3 vehicles, 12 agents, he said quietly, as if announcing the heartbeat of truth approaching. Dana nodded once unshaken. Eric pulled into himself like a child about to be dragged from a hiding place. Charles tried to steady his breath, but failed, gripping the chair so hard his knuckles turned bone white. You don't understand, he stammered. If you take me down, this whole bank, this entire system will collapse. A system that deserves to fall should fall, Dana said. My father said that before you killed him. Linda covered her mouth, choking on a sob. Marcus closed his eyes for 1 second, as though hearing an echo from a man he had never met, but now felt indebted to. Eric suddenly jumped from his seat, his voice shrill with panic. We have to run. Charles, if the Bureau comes in and sees. They already saw, Dana said, her gaze shifting to the camera. They have been watching from the first minute. A wave of paralysis washed over Charles. His eyes lifted toward the camera as if it had transformed into the eye of some merciless truth. Then the sound that froze every soul in the building erupted. Boom! The front doors of the bank burst open, followed by a chorus of voices. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Everybody stay where you are. The rapid stomp of boots echoed through the hallway, like hammers coming down on every hidden sin. Marcus stepped aside, clearing a path, his hand resting on his belt. But this time, not to protect wrongdoing this time, to protect the one exposing it. Charles backed away. Eric collapsed onto the floor. Linda pressed both hands over her mouth as tears spilled. Dana did not move. She looked toward the doorway, where bright hallway lights framed the silhouette of the lead agent. And in that suspended moment, a moment stretching across the entire bank, across 10 years of buried storms, everything seemed to hold its breath. Then the agent's voice rang out sharp and clear. Chief Carter, we are here. And right then, at that exact moment, the empire of Langford and Miles collapsed completely. The moment the lead agent stepped inside, the white light from the hallway cut into the interrogation room like a cold blade slicing through air thick as cement. Charles Langford went rigid, trembling like a statue about to crack, while Eric Nolan curled tighter beneath the table, his face buried in his palms, as if closing his eyes could make this nightmare dissolve. But nightmares did not dissolve today. They had just become a living verdict. The agent stepped forward, tactical gear dark, and polished the visor on his helmet, reflecting the image of Dana Carter, standing at the center of the room, like the calm eye of a storm, awakened by justice itself. "Chief Carter," he said with a respectful nod, his voice steady enough to freeze everyone in place. "All teams are in position." Marcus Hale watched, eyes wide in disbelief, as the woman he had escorted into this room, the woman treated as a suspect, was in fact the superior of the very agents now filling the building. His throat tightened. He had not merely protected an innocent woman. He had nearly watched a federal chief be buried again by the same system that killed her father. Dana nodded, her voice low but clear. "Confirmed, full recording, full recording." "Chief," the agent answered. From the first second, a shadow of anguish flickered across Dana's eyes, brief but unmistakable, as though the image of her father, Robert Carter, appeared in that moment, sitting where she now stood, pressured, dismissed, and with no one walking in to save him. But this time everything was different. This time she was here to finish what he never got the chance to complete. She turned to Charles Langford. "You heard that, didn't you?" Charles opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Despair squeezed his voice into silence. Dana did not need him to answer. "Open the cuffs," she ordered. The agent approached. Charles lurched backward, slamming into the wall. No, I didn't do anything wrong." Dana looked at him, her gaze stripped clean of anger or hatred. It was the cold, detached gaze people give to someone who has stepped beyond the line of humanity. "Then you should have no problem with us reviewing the footage, right?" Charles trembled so violently his knees collapsed beneath him. That camera cannot. It is evidence," Dana said. "Just like what you did to my father." The name Robert Carter hit Charles like an electric jolt. He convulsed, then screamed in panic. He took his own life. He was weak. He couldn't handle pressure. A federal agent roared, "Say that again!" Marcus surged forward, fury burning across his face, but Dana lifted a hand, stopping him without looking away from Charles. "You feared my father," she said quietly. "You feared the truth he carried. So you killed him by shutting down his voice. But you forgot something." She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper sharp enough to cut bone. "You cannot kill the voice of the truth, not when the one who carries it is his daughter." Charles collapsed onto the floor. Eric watched, shaking uncontrollably, then looked up at Dana like a child begging for mercy. "I was just following orders. I didn't know anything about your father." Dana still didn't look at him. "But you knew about me," she said. "You knew I did nothing wrong, and you wrote a false report anyway." Eric burst into tears. "I was scared of losing my job, scared of him." Dana didn't answer him, but the agent behind her did. "Eric Nolan," he announced, his voice a hammer dropping. "You are under arrest for falsifying federal reports, obstruction of justice, and supporting a system of discriminatory practices." Marcus stepped back, inhaling deeply as he watched the cuffs lock around Eric's wrists. For the first time in years, he felt he was standing in the right place. Linda Cooper appeared at the doorway, holding a thick stack of documents, the entire 10-year history of discriminatory lending. Her eyes were swollen with tears, but her posture stood tall. "I printed everything, all the records. I will turn them over to the Bureau." The agent nodded. "You will be protected." Linda looked at Dana, voice trembling. "Your father, he didn't die for nothing." Dana laid a gentle hand over Linda's, a moment of humanity rising among the ruins of corruption. "No," she said softly. "Thanks to people like you, he lives again." Footsteps filled the hallway, swift, firm, in unison. The lead agent turned to Dana. "Chief Carter, all zones are secured. Report ready for submission. Bring them in," Dana said. And then the agents filed into the room, each one a dark silhouette carrying the authority that had been denied for 10 long years. Charles Langford was lifted to his feet, no longer resisting. He looked at Dana with hollow eyes, the eyes of a man who had just lost his empire, his power, and the illusion that he could outrun the truth. Dana spoke only one sentence. "It's over, Mr. Langford." Then she turned away. No anger left. No hatred. Only the path ahead, the path built on the truth her father left behind. When the interrogation room doors swung open and Charles Langford was led out in the cuffs, every employee in the lobby froze. No one spoke a word. But in that silence, something had never been clearer. Today an empire fell, and a 10-year promise was fulfilled. As the agents escorted Charles Langford out of the interrogation room, the metallic click of the cuffs around his wrists rang sharp and cold like metal striking stone in a graveyard. Dana Carter walked behind him with a calm, proud stride, as if every step she took was stitching back together the path her father had been forced to abandon 10 years earlier. The lobby of Langford and Miles froze in absolute silence. Every employee stood still, watching their chief executive officer, the man who once controlled the entire building, with a flick of his hand, being taken away like a federal criminal. The Bureau's cameras cast bright white beams across Charles's stunned face, reflecting the perfect contrast between fabricated power and naked truth. Near the entrance, Linda Cooper clutched the envelope, holding 10 years of hidden documents. She handed it to an agent. This is everything. Every crime. The agent accepted it with a firm nod, and in that instant, Linda felt the weight of punishment lift from her shoulders. She looked at Dana with grateful, trembling eyes. Dana placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You stood up. That's what my father believed people were capable of." Across the room, Eric Nolan was shoved against the wall as his cuffs snapped shut. He cried without sound, mumbling apologies that could not erase the scars now carved into federal records. Marcus Hale stood beside Dana, his back straight, his eyes steady, like a man who had finally reclaimed the honor he lost after the battlefield. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I am," Dana said. "And thank you for seeing what was right when everyone else looked at what was wrong." Marcus inhaled deeply, his heart pounding. He had never expected to stand beside a bureau chief, but watching Dana confront an entire corrupt system made him understand something larger. He was not standing with an organization. He was standing with justice. Agent Thomas Reed entered the lobby, his eyes carrying memories not yet faded. He looked at Dana, then at the old watch on her wrist, Robert's watch. "It's time," he said, voice low and worn. Dana nodded, lifting the watch. Afternoon light passed through the scratched glass, striking the frozen time on its face, 3 hours, 41 minutes, the moment it stopped forever. "Your father would be proud," Reed said. "He spent his life fighting to bring the truth into the light." "And they silenced him," Dana replied, her eyes glistening. "But today he lives again." Reed placed a steady hand on her shoulder, like a father offering his final blessing. "No. Today you completed the investigation he started. This is not his return. This is your victory." Outside Bureau vehicles revved their engines, preparing to take Charles and Eric away. A crowd had formed along the hallway, their eyes fixed on the scene, not just watching a chief executive being arrested, but witnessing a man who thought he stood above the law bow, beneath the weight of truth. Linda approached Dana once more. "You'll continue this, won't you?" Dana smiled softly, a smile both quiet and profound. "I'll visit all 29 families. I'll tell them how my father fought for them. No one will be forgotten again. Marcus listened to every word, his chest tightening, with the gravity of justice finally restored. "Do you need backup?" he asked. "Yes," Dana said, turning to him with steady eyes. "I need people who can stand on the line between right and wrong. People like you." Marcus drew a long breath, knowing he was stepping into a new purpose. As Dana stepped out the door, the evening breeze brushed across her face, the air carrying the scent of a newly opened chapter. On the front steps, she paused and looked back at the building that buried her father and nearly buried her today. "Dad," she whispered, "I finished it." The watch still read 3 hours, 41 minutes, but for the first time in 10 years, Dana felt time begin to move again. She descended the steps, walking toward the light, and her father's story, written with tears, blood, and truth, finally found its final page. A page ending in justice. A page opening to hope. A page of rebirth. Justice served. Justice returned. Justice reborn. From the perspective of a specialist in systemic justice and organizational culture, Dana Carter's story reveals a truth that never grows old. Power cannot endure when it is built on fear, and the truth will always find its way back, even if it takes 10 years. Her journey reminds us that silence feeds injustice, while the courage to stand up can reshape an entire system. If this story resonates with you, like and subscribe to continue following these journeys that bring the truth to light. Before you go, leave a 3-word comment: trust in justice.